Trails is a huge series that's gone on for a long time. That being the case, there are a ton of different opinions on which is the best part, where to begin, what you need to play, etc., and on, and it can be all a bit confusing for someone coming into it for the first time, and that's made even worse by a vocal minority of the fanbase. Those are the ones saying you need to play from the start. You have to play each game, in order, non-stop, every waking hour. Alright, well, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you get the point. In actuality, there are multiple different jumping on points in the Trails series, and now that Trails Through Daybreak is coming to North America, it has a lot of people that are new to the series, interested in trying it, but unsure if they can just start there. Trails Through Daybreak is definitely a place you can jump on, but there could be somewhere else that is better for you, and that's a strength of the Trails series, not a weakness. Each part of the series has reasons to start at each point, things that make it unique, strengths and weaknesses. I'll try to keep it manageable because, hey, I know you'd probably rather get to playing the games than listening to someone ramble about them for hours, and Trails definitely is a series you could discuss pretty endlessly. So let's start off with some truths about the Trails series as a whole. Firstly, you should expect and you should want to take your time. This is not a series that is going to be breakneck speed. You're not going to be jumping from exciting moment to exciting moment nonstop, breakneck pace. It's just not. It's a slower paced game. There's a lot more nuance to it. A huge part of world building, for example, is talking to NPCs. And you talk to these NPCs not just the one time, but multiple times over the period of the entire game at different points in the story, and they'll have different things to say. They'll be, moving forward in their own stories, which is something really cool about the Trails. They also have a very similar format. They go section by section, down a list of each different thing, complete each goal at specific times. It can be a bit formulaic. It's not necessarily going to, knock you off your feet every second. Although there are definitely twists and turns, right? But it can be a little formulaic. It also has a more lighthearted tone, so this isn't going to be a game that is constantly dark, like you're not jumping into Bloodborne here, you're jumping into Trails. It's a Falcom game, they're a bit more lighthearted, though they're not afraid to touch on larger and more serious themes, and that is definitely something that they will do. So, if all of that sounds interesting to you, then you might like Trails. So, where should you start? The eternal question. Truthfully, you can start at any point in the series, and many people will tell you to start at Trails in the Sky, because, it's the beginning, right? It's a good choice, but it's not necessary. Each part in the series has strengths, weaknesses, things they do well, things they don't do as well. So let's go over some of those and talk about what makes each part unique. The Trails in the Sky has a superbly told story. That is definitely where it does its best work, but it probably has the weakest combat, in that it is just the start. It's the start of the Trails part of the Legend of Heroes series, so it doesn't have as many bells and whistles, it's not as quick paced, it's a little bit slower. That's how it is. It really makes you care about the characters though. They're all really well written. For example, Estelle and Joshua's relationship has a lot of complexity. It's one of the more interesting and well-told relationships in gaming. And I think that this is something that if you play through, you'll come to really love it. But the overall theme of that relationship might be a hard pill to swallow for some people. And that's because they are adoptive siblings, technically. So they're not related by blood at all. But that can be a bit weird for people. For me, I don't really care. It's not really about that. They've done such a good job of moving the relationship from where it starts to where it ends that you kind of forget that. It can be very slow at times, but part of the enjoyment of Trails in the Sky is slowing down, taking things in, going through each part at a nice, slow, relaxed pace. Moving on to Trails from Zero and then Azure. These are pretty similar to Sky, but it has some key differences. This is an entirely different section of the series. A lot of time is spent in a single city. That city is Crossbell. The city changes over time. You get to know a lot of the characters within it, who also change over time. The location is in between two major powers, which makes it a very interesting political story, so that's definitely something that you'll see as you're going through it. Part of this strength can also be a weakness. You might get a little bit tired of being in the same city for a lot of the game, but that is the way it goes. Trails from Zero and Azure are both taking place in Crossbell, but they do jump out of it. You're not in that one city the entire time, but you do spend a lot of time in it. You can think of it as Kamurocho in Yakuza, that kind of thing, where there's a lot of changes to it, but you are technically in the same place for the entire time. Trails of Cold Steel takes the game series into a new engine and an entirely new arc within the Erebonian Empire. So if that's somewhere that you think is more interesting, it could definitely be another place to start. It's technically a sequel to Trails in the Sky and the other two games, Zero and Azure, but it's a good place to start. You don't have to play the previous games to understand anything that's going on pretty much throughout the entire game. It could be nice because there are some points where some of the characters from previous games come into it, and if you don't know who they are, then they won't have as big of an impact, but I think you'll understand it as you go through. And if you then go back to those other games, it can be actually pretty cool to see where they came from and that sort of thing. It can be a bit more familiar to people who play modern games, so that could be something you think about if you want to jump into Cold Steel. It has a faster paced combat system, it has a bit better production values. I think personally that it has weaker characters than the previous two Trails series. Again, that's subjective, but that is my opinion. I think Reen as a protagonist is a bit more of an archetypal anime, slash JRPG protagonist. He's like a do-gooder who fights for his friends, he works hard, and has a harem of girls that are after him. Which is not entirely bad, and it's not a bad thing, okay? There's a reason that this is a very popular archetype, but Trails of Cold Steel is 300 hours long, so it just depends on what, not the first game, okay? It has 4 parts to it, so that's why it's that long. But yeah, it just depends on what you're interested in. If you're into, like, that sort of thing, if you really like shonen and that sort of thing, you'll probably like Trails of Cold Steel a lot more than someone that, wants something that is more, I don't know, just a different style of character. Trails Through Daybreak is a new start with a different type of protagonist and a newer, more updated engine. It's more fast-paced even than Trails of Cold Steel due to the combat mixing action and turn-based. So you can swap between action and turn-based on the fly, which is really cool. Well, not completely on the fly. I think if you get into turn-based, you are then stuck in turn-based, but you can kill some of the weaker enemies very quickly in the action combat, which is really cool. I like that a lot. That adds something really nice to it that I think the series needed. I think the character leans a bit more into gray areas, though he is generally a good guy. He's a Spriggan. And this is a career path where it's someone who will take on jobs that the Bracer Guild and the police won't, which are generally more by the books kind of organizations. Overall, there are higher quality production values, much more modern, though it still is Falcom. They're maybe a bit behind the times, not entirely, but it definitely feels more modern than any of the other parts of the series that have come before it. It also adds an alignment system, allowing you to make choices that affect the way the story plays out. The main story stays fairly close to the same regardless, but I really like that aspect of it. Alignment system, kind of a gray character. It's pulls me in so much more than Trails of Cold Steel. But again, that is something that you'll have to decide for yourself, whether you are interested in that. So now you know a bit about each part of the series and what makes them all unique. So where should you start? Well, you should decide that for yourself, to be honest. But my personal opinion is that Trails Through Daybreak is a great place to start. It's fresh, it's new. I really like the idea of a character that isn't necessarily a perfect Superman type, where he's just going to be a paragon of virtue. This guy isn't necessarily a paragon of virtue. He's willing to take on jobs that may not go that direction, and you're also making these choices. So I also like being able to speed things up in combat a bit, take care of lower level monsters very quickly, without having to go through a long turn-based fight, so that speeds things up, gets you to the meat of the journey quicker. So, what about you? For veterans of the series, where did you start? People coming into the first time, where are you thinking of beginning your journey? Let me know. Thanks for watching.